welcome back. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Speaking Legally with attorneys Royce Russell and Ep3. Today, Ep3 will not be live on this broadcast. We want to extend our condolences to him and his family who suffered a loss due to COVID-19. Things are happening in real time, and we just have to be nimble in the process, but we want him to know that our love and prayers are going out to him. So feel free to share that and your condolences when time permits. And since our last show, a lot has happened. And Attorney Royce Russell, before we get into our discussion today, you want to tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do if they're joining us for the first time.
Yes, for all the listeners that are joining us for the first time, I want to say welcome to Speaking Legally, where we look at legal issues in conjunction with our culture. Where do they meet? How do we confront that? How do we recognize it? How do we utilize it? How do we synthesize the information that we're receiving in our community? And what do we do with it? So I want to welcome the first-time listeners. Hopefully you'll be a first-time listener and a long-time listener and watching this show where it appears in social media. Once again, I do want to send my condolences to my co-host, attorney Ed Pichardo. He is a true soldier. As we know, things are happening in real time, and we just want to send our prayers and our condolences for his loss. And I just want to let him know that I'm always thinking about him and thinking about him, especially today, and I will carry the torch in his name to try to tackle what we see as the obvious, but many may not see as so obvious. So welcome to the show. Once again, I'm attorney Royce Russell. I can be reached at 718-785-8890. I'm the author of Cardiac Arrest, a tactical guide on how to manage unlawful police encounters, where our motto is to think, stay calm, stay composed, be aware, listen, and make a call. So welcome.
Thank you, Attorney Russell. So as we know, so much is happening every day. And we're seeing a lot in the news on how the criminal justice system is also being impacted by COVID-19, how we're being policed in our communities. And some of the headlines that have recently come about is bringing great discussion points for households while they're sheltering in and just talking about what we're seeing. So I know that there was some that came to mind that you wanted to touch on today. So let's start with the first news headline that we want to tackle in our conversation.
Well, if anyone has been listening, and I hope you have, and if not, you can try to find a way to catch episode 2 and episode 1 of Speaking Legally. We were last talking about our community adhering to the social distancing rules. And what made the news was the barbershop party for which folks in our community were not obeying the social distancing rules, whereupon there were not only summons given out for a party that was happening in the barbershop, there were arrests made for individuals having guns and individuals having drugs. And then we went on to discuss how that was mirrored in what the media termed as a model party, where on the other side of town, there was another social gathering, and it was of people of color for which an arrest were made, and gun was found, and drugs were found, and obviously summonses were issued. And Ed and I had a very heartfelt warning to our community, or articulating a warning to our community that we should be in adherence to the social distancing rules. One is a health issue. Two, just from a criminal standpoint, practicing the criminal defense law, as well as Ed and state and federal, both of us, we know how you can be issued a summons and forget that you were issued the summons, and that translates to a warrant, which translates to an arrest, which translates to you being incarcerated for a period of time. And we do not need that in our community, especially when we know that our community is hurting from the health perspective, from the economic perspective, and we know that in our community, we are targeted for better or for worse, and more for worse, when it comes down to police interactions and abuse and misconduct. So I know I said a lot, but I say that to say that in the news, as you asked, Dr. Grant, in the news, we just recently heard of and saw in the news, if you watch your local news in New York City, that there was a violation of social distancing once again. And this involved, I believe, the Hasidic Jewish community, for which there was a funeral. And at that funeral, just mobs and crowds and mobs and crowds that the police could not even contain the amount of people that were present for this funeral service. Some had masks, a lot did not have masks. You can tell that the social distancing rules were violated left, right, up the middle, in between. The scene on the TV screen was a police car just trying to get down the block, and it was just crowds and crowds and crowds and crowds, as if you were at a baseball game or a football game of Hasidic Jews and their community getting together. Now, I always say this is a show where the legal meets the cultural. And so let them meet, let us confront it, let us realize it, let us look at it, let's make sure that we underline it, put it in bold and asterisks around it. At the end of the day of this violation, given this funeral, no one was arrested and no summonses were issued. And that is a critical point of what we're discussing today, because we know that there's disparities in our community as how we're treated by law enforcement and how the law applies to us. How can you have a violation of this magnitude and no one was arrested and no summons were given? And in the other two instances where there were people of color, multiple summonses were given. And we'll exclude anyone that had any illegal contraband on them, because as stupid is, stupid does, right? And so we'll just put that to the side. Or as Red Fox say, you big dummy, we'll put that definitely to the side. And there were other people that were there that violated the social distancing rule, and they received summonses. And the media and Mayor de Blasio made sure that that was heard around the world. But in this instance, what we've heard articulated in the news and in the media, that Mayor de Blasio is going to stiffen up on giving summonses. That does not sit well with me. That probably does not sit well with a lot of people.
It doesn't. So let me let you take a breath for a minute, because it's all over the news, particularly today. So ironic that, we're having the show and we're talking about speaking legally. He was actually reprimanded for how he handled his frustration around seeing hundreds of people gathering in a city street when we're in the middle of sheltering in, and we have guidelines that he's instituted, that the governor's instituted, on not being in these public places. And we know it was a funeral, but how does it look for everybody else who's lost loved ones in this pandemic, who could not gather to pay respects to the people that they love because they weren't allowed to have more than 8 to 10 people that are in a funeral home if they were able to even have a service? So when we talk about the disparities, it really is glaring, and it causes a level of frustration. But we also want to be mindful that in this time, and I want you to speak from the legal aspect of those people who were arrested, we're living in two different realities. So these weren't summonses given out, arrests made, and we feel some kind of way about that. So I just want us to just have a real talk about how we as a community can constructively react to what we saw go down in the last 24 hours.
Well, let me backtrack and say that if you've been living on this earth, you know that there is disparity in treatment. That is not anything new. We know that. And we know that throughout our life in America, as African Americans, as Latinos, as any hue of any shade, we have to be on our P's and double our Q's in reference to what goes on in our community and the interaction with police. So I say all that to say this, is that we can't mirror what we've seen. We just can't. As much as we want to, we can't, because the end result will not be good. The end result would be fines. The end results would be a clashing of frustration and a voicing of, how dare you come into our community and want to deprive us of having a funeral service or paying respects to a loved one when you didn't do this in another community. And the underlying statement that a lot of people are not realizing is that in order to have a gathering of this magnitude, usually there's some coordination with police departments. Usually there's some coordination with some precinct whatsoever, something where you say that we need X block and Y block blocked off, that there will be a gathering. These gatherings in that community just don't happen by happenstance. It is organized. Uh, the precinct knows that there's going to be a large gathering. The precinct have cars, even when they go to the synagogue, have cars out there to make sure that they can cross the street and they can walk, and that they can walk peacefully. I don't have an issue with that. But what I do have an issue is that you can't be a walking contradiction, and that you have these protocols that are violated, but yet in a different community, summonses and arrests are made. And so how can we react to that? How can we push our agenda and our envelope forward when we know that we're doing funeral services by Zoom? Is that we have to voice our opinion, literally. We have to write. We have to do our commentary. We have to make sure our voice is heard. This is a platform for which we can do it. At least this is one attorney that's standing out there saying, hey, look, we need to look at these discrepancies, these disparities. We need to look at these contradictions, and we need to know how to manage it. And we need to recognize that in managing it, we have to be careful as well.
And I appreciate that, because we do have to have some recourse of how we deal, and we're hoping that it's constructive. And of course, with legal advice from you and Ed on the show, our community can be equipped with ways in which they can react in a way that gets answers, and not just emotionally, but how do we really have our voices heard. So I want to pause and just thank a few people who are watching. Hey, Shaw Brooks. Hi, Susan. Hey, Brady, Geraldine, Rob, we appreciate you, and share this if you feel there's content here, of course, that can help people, particularly around the issues that we're discussing for Speaking Legally. So that's one point, let our voices be heard. So that could be writing petitions, that could be airing, like you are publicly, your concern around the inequity in how we are seeing these laws mandated and managed within a particular place like New York. But there's some other headlines that are more on a national level that we're seeing play out during this COVID-19 time that I want to give you a chance to comment on as well. I believe it was out in Chi-Town.
Yeah, well, we know that that there was a violation of social distancing as well out there, right? And we also know that there were heavy-handed in the arrests, heavy-handed in the summonses, and heavy-handed in the punitive consequences that came out of that. And we're going to see that nationwide. I mean, there's not a fluke that no matter where you go, if you're a person of color, the law comes down heavy on you. And we know that in Chicago and in New York, and I'll just read New York part, but we know this exists in Chicago, that there are disparities in police response time as it comes down to breaking up any groups that are violating the social distancing rules. So you have in our community, you have people that want their community protected. I don't know anybody who's a person of color who does not want their community protected. They are calling in and they're saying, look, we see this violation go on. We need for you to come and stop it. And the police are taking an extremely long time to respond. And we know that has happened throughout history when it comes down to other violent criminal conduct, and it is still being perpetuated today. And so let me just read something to you. We know about the Brooklyn barbershop, right? And so studies have shown that the NYPD takes the longest to respond and finalize social distancing complaints in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, even though a majority white areas report the most violation of rules meant to curb crowds and the spread of coronavirus. The Daily News analysis of the city data shows that police took an hour and 48 minutes on average to respond to a 311 call in communities of color.
Wow. So that was reported. That's in our Daily News, correct?
That's right. That's right.
For themselves.
Right. Majority of Black community only account for 17% of the 311 complaints. And in communities where most people are Hispanic, police spent an hour and 42 minutes on the average to close social distancing reports to 311. Majority Hispanic communities saw roughly 28% of all reports. And in areas where residents are white, made up about 45% of the complaints about social distancing, police took just an hour on average to address these issues. So, I mean, yeah, you could talk about, Royce, why you spending time talking about hour and 48 minutes, an hour and 38 minutes, and an hour. And this time, in this day and time, every minute, every second counts. And we know that we don't get the fair share of what we should. We know that our communities are underserviced. And unless you want that not to happen, it will continue to happen. And it translates from being underserviced in our community, translates to being underserviced and not represented and not having someone advocate for you when you're incarcerated, and you are basically pushed out of the judicial system. And we don't need that. We need to be engaged and involved.
So with that being said, for the show today, where we're talking about highlighting an obvious truth, there's constructive ways to deal with our expression around that. But then now, if you do get a summons, you and Ed talked a little bit about how things are changing because courts are not open the way they would normally be during COVID-19, and what you can and cannot do if someone in your family is detained for any reason. So how do our audience members, our community members handle the summons issue, like those who got the summonses in Brooklyn a little over a week ago?
Well, one thing for sure, when I was growing up, we had many things posted on our refrigerator. That summons needs to be posted on the refrigerator because it has a future date. And that future date is probably July and probably August. And so you don't want to forget that. And I can't reiterate that enough. You don't want to forget that. Two, unlike any other summons that you will receive, I would suggest that maybe you have representation and serious representation, because I don't know how the judicial system is going to react to that. I don't know if they're going to look at it like just a slap on the wrist and now, the coronavirus is over and we're just going to give you a fine, or there's going to be a visceral reaction because that judge had a loved one that fell ill to the virus, and so therefore has no sympathy and no empathy for anyone that lives in New York City housing, which is crowded in and of itself, and happen to violate the social distancing rules or intentionally violated the social distancing rules. So I think that's something that people need to look into until we get a sense of what the trend is and how courts are dealing with it. I would tell you that I want to make sure that our listeners, before time expires on this episode, that they understand that when they're reading articles that people are being released for prison because of COVID, they have to read in very detail, having represented at least 10, 12 defendants that look to apply for early release because of COVID. That means either getting out of Rikers, getting out of federal prison, federal detention, because the disease has taken over certain institutions, or the institution's inability to counterattack disease. Those motions are being granted in very few instances. So not everybody's getting out of Rikers. All the rapists are not loose. All the violators, murderers, you name it, however you want to categorize it, are not being let loose. That is not what is happening. There is a small portion of people that can apply for early release, and it's even a smaller portion that even get the benefit. And what I mean by small portion, what we call high risk category vulnerable people, over the age of 60, have diabetes, have high blood pressure, overweight, have asthma or some sleep apnea, something of that nature. And certain prisons are putting those people on what they call the vulnerable list, so the judge can look at these people and say, while they're waiting for trial, they need to be on strict home arrest or home detention. Or if they have already served a certain portion of their sentence, that they can be released back into the community, such as like a halfway house or something of that nature. And I don't want our community to get it twisted. It is not happening for a vast majority of a community, and it's happening for a very few. And so when we see headlines like 6ix9ine is getting released from jail because he filed a motion for COVID, some of it has to do with his social economic status, but the other part has to do that he was a cooperator and he cooperated for the federal government. And in his cooperation, they got convictions of several other people. And when we look at someone like Michael Avenatti, I believe that's his name, who extorted $20 million from Nike. That's a white collar crime. And he was being housed in NDC. And we all know white collar crimes, which are crimes that are of a financial nature, of a fraud nature, which is not violent in and of itself, that the world looks at those type of crimes differently as opposed to someone selling drugs or someone robbing someone or someone committing what the world deems as a violent crime. And so when you're dealing with violent crimes, the court takes a very, very strict and narrow analysis of why you should be let go, especially when you have institutions trying to prevent the COVID-19 from spreading within.
Interesting. That's a lot, and I'm sure that you and Ed will continue some more of that dialogue because that's a hot button topic, particularly in the New York City area around the release and what that looks like. But you gave some context to the community so they understand it's not just a free for all, and everyone is not being released because of COVID. And there are some strict measures that have been put in place that allow that to happen. And I really want to just circle back before we wrap up today's show on something that you said that was very important. When you think about summons and getting a summons, you said put it on your...
I thought everything I said was important.
Okay, well, everything you said was...
I mean, like, all right, I'm just making sure I'm on the right track. You know what I mean?
Yes, Mr. Russell, it's all important, but one very important thing was the fact that you said that there is a date that's on the summons. And I really want to underscore just how important that is in general, pre-COVID-19 and definitely post-COVID-19. When you get a summons and there's a date and you don't show up, the next thing that happens is there's a warrant out for your arrest.
That is correct. The warrant is for your arrest.
And you might just forget that you had it, and then you get stopped for a traffic violation, and that shows up, and then it starts a series of events that we don't want to see. And part of what you've dedicated your career to and helping to defend those who have been in precarious situations, but this is something that they can actually do and share with other people so that they don't have to end up retaining you for that kind of legal service. So I really just wanted to go back to that.
I believe when you're stopped, because you will be stopped, that's just how it goes, right? That's just how it goes. You're not going to realize and recognize that you had this summons or that you missed the court date because it's not on your radar. It's not something that was important to you at the time that it happened. And it definitely was important. It's not important as time goes on because the world is starting to normalize and you're starting to play a part in the mainstream and you're not thinking about that. And you don't want to take off of work to go handle the summons because you just got back to work. So something that can be small on the surface, such as a summons, can snowball into something very big. And what I mean by that is behind door number one is a judge who maybe has 45 of these summonses on his calendar in any given day. And maybe 30 of those people didn't show up. So now that judge, his mental makeup is different now. And no one wants to be pushed around and everyone wants to be taken seriously. And maybe the judge is frustrated because he has to deal with these warrants and really has other things on the calendar that he needs to attend to. And so something as simple as this can turn into something major. And you can argue with the police as to, I know I don't have any warrants, why you're stopping me, and not realize that this is what's in your rearview mirror. So I think we need to take care of that. We need to mark it, air it on the refrigerator, make sure we're there, get it dismissed in the first day or pay the fine in the first day, depending upon the circumstances and the nature for which the court is dealing with this, because I don't know if there's much to fight, right? The police are there, the issue of summons. What is there much to fight on that? But we'll tackle it when time comes, but we have to know when the time is to tackle it. And for those that that are in the system, or loved ones that know of, people that are in the system, whether it's in federal or whether it's in state, you should ask your attorney, is my friend eligible to have a motion filed and be heard before the court? We call a motion for early release, so they can be released during the pendency of their case, be released early because they've been sentenced, because of COVID pandemic within Rikers or within any institution. And whether or not we believe that we're going to get it at the end of the day, we should still impart and force and encourage the attorneys out there representing the loved ones to file that motion, because you never know.
Right. You never know. That can go to a whole nother show of just talking about all the different reliefs that are out there. You don't know what you'll get, but it can't hurt, to make sure that you're in a position that you can take advantage of what's being offered. So with that being said, it's time to come to a close of another episode of Speaking Legally. And I just want you to share with everyone, once again, how they can contact you and maybe even purchase your book, Cardiac Arrest, How to Handle Unlawful Police Stops, is something to definitely have with you. We don't know what the new normal is going to look like, and we have to continue to keep ourselves informed on how we can protect ourselves, our rights, and our communities.
Once again, my name is Royce Russell. I want to thank you for listening to and watching Speaking Legally. As I said, I'm the author of a book of Cardiac Arrest, Tactical Guide on How to Handle Unlawful Police Encounters. You can purchase us on Amazon. You can follow us on our website. You can, and then Dr. Stacy's about to say the website right now because she can't help herself but to chime in and say that. So this is real time, folks. So go ahead.
cardiacarrestbook.net. Just trying to help Mr. Russell make sure you get to the right place to purchase.
That's right, cardiacarrestbook.net. You can purchase there. And, just follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. Know that we're going to be back in the community, whether we're going to be there in person or whether we're going to be there virtually. And remember, if you have an encounter, you want to think, stay calm. And that is stay composed. That means, be aware, listen, and make a call. That's what we ask. Think calm.
That's right. Think calm, and thank you all. Hey, David, thank you for tuning in. Shawnee, we appreciate you. Amy, thank you all for tuning in. Share this broadcast out. We'll be coming back with additional information, particularly around the law and our community and the things that you can do to really be aware of what's happening during COVID-19. And as we close out our show, we dedicated today to our other co-host, Ed Pichardo, Esquire, and his family, and our love and condolences go out to them during their time of bereavement. So thank you for tuning in. This is Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. We appreciate you being here and being a part of our community. Until next week, take care, be well, and stay safe.
Take care.